I spoke with a representative of the family tree company to find out how things are going with my daughter's DNA test. I gave her the test as an extra Christmas gift and provided the necessary tracking numbers. After a short wait, a company representative informed me that the test had indeed been processed, but for privacy reasons, he was unable to disclose any additional details. Despite this assurance, I still wondered why the test results were not displayed in my DNA document. I asked impatiently, "Sir, could you explain why my daughter might not appear in the DNA?" The man replied in a slightly irritated tone, "There are several reasons why she might not appear, but I cannot discuss this particular test with you." Suddenly it dawned on me. The main reason she's not on my list is that she just doesn't belong there. I ended the conversation feeling puzzled. I remembered pressing the red end call button and tears began to flow. When I came to my senses a few minutes later, I found myself curled up on the couch in the family room. When my lunch break was 15 minutes away, I decided to call my daughter, who most likely also had a lunch break since we were in the same time zone. Knowing that she usually likes to read at lunch at her table, I was not afraid to interrupt her. To my surprise, she picked up the phone on the first ring. "Hi, Dad. How are you feeling?" she asked with a note of fatigue in her voice. "I want you to know that I love you and trust you completely, but I made some inquiries about the DNA test. I contacted several genealogy experts and they informed me that the test was actually done about 2 weeks ago," I began. The sound of air being sucked in from her side was quickly followed by a tense silence that seemed to last at least 10 seconds. "I know, Dad, we need to talk, but now is not the time or the place," she said urgently. "Call me in the evening and make sure that Mom is not around," the daughter asked. As I hurried back to the office, a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions was spinning in my head, making it difficult to focus on my work at an engineering firm. There were too many questions in my head, and the disturbing realization that my daughter might not be who I thought she was. Being a person with analytical abilities, I understood how important it is to prioritize and methodically solve problems. The position of Vice President of Engineering at Sakayo Electronics was not an accident, but the result of my abilities. At that moment, I realized that the best approach for me was to approach my personal problems the same way as a project at work, with a clear plan and organized steps. Dwayne Scapis, the wise old man who hired me directly from Purdue University to his startup, instilled this way of thinking in me. Under his leadership, Scapists has grown into a leading company in the industry and has brought us both significant success. Working closely with Dwayne, I not only received a good salary and benefits, but also had the honor of collaborating with talented and humorous colleagues. When I returned home in the evening, I was greeted by my beautiful, attractive wife and our 3 wonderful children. Over time, our children grew up, moved away, started their own families, and our house began to seem a little empty. But we found new ways to fill our time and rekindle our bond as a couple. Thinking about the past month, I couldn't get rid of the memories of several unusual incidents, such as Marissa's unexpected call to my wife a couple of weeks ago. One Tuesday evening, while we were sitting in the family room watching TV, Tracy's phone suddenly rang, interrupting our peaceful evening. Before answering, she glanced at the phone screen, making it clear that she still had something to discuss. The conversation lasted about 5 minutes, and Tracy mostly gave short yes or no answers. When she finished talking, I noticed that there were tears in her eyes. Worried, I asked how she was feeling, to which she replied that Marissa's cat had health problems. She assured me that it was not a very serious problem. But I couldn't help but notice that my wife looked a little worried in my presence. It seemed strange to me that she was so interested in the welfare of Marissa's cat. It wasn't until Marissa found out about the test results that the truth came out. Tracy didn't know that I sent the test to Marissa, but at the time I didn't think much of it. Marissa was the only child of the 3 who showed curiosity about genealogy, which prompted me to purchase an online kit for her. Over the years, as I delved into my family's history, I particularly enjoyed the aspect of DNA analysis. I assumed that Marissa would be happy to take the test, But when I got home, I tried to keep my composure in Tracy's presence, hiding my disappointment and annoyance. I first met Tracy in my sophomore year at Purdue University. Although we did not communicate until last year, but after a personal meeting, our connection remained inseparable. We tied the knot a year after graduating from college 3 decades ago, and I firmly believe it was the best choice of my life. Even now, 31 years later, Tracy, at 54, still radiates beauty. Despite raising 3 children, she is constantly engaged in sports and has the physique of a 30-year-old woman. My wife was a source of joy and laughter, and I was thrilled at the thought of spending eternity with her. But today, everything has changed. Around 8 o'clock in the evening, I made up an excuse to leave Tracy in the room and went out on the porch to the swing to secretly call Marissa. As soon as she picked up the phone, I could hear the anguish in her voice as she uttered these heartbreaking words. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have told you earlier, but Mom wanted to talk to you first before I said anything," Marissa said, almost in a whisper. "Please don't worry, I'm not offended by you. Take a deep breath," I gently reassured my daughter. "I'm not trying to blame you for anything," I said softly. "You're just as much a victim in this situation as I am," I said. I could hear heavy breathing on the other end of the phone line, and I knew it was bothering her. "Darling, I want you to understand that this will not change our relationship in any way. I will always be your father, and you will always be my precious pumpkin," I soothed my daughter as best I could. "I have always showered you, my children, with my love, and even now, after all these years, I do not intend to stop, even if you do not want it," I said. With tears streaming down her face, she broke down and sobbed almost unintelligibly into the phone. "I love you, Daddy. I don't need anyone but you. You are my everything," said the daughter. "I don't want to embarrass you, but you're the one I trust most with DNA information. Let's focus the conversation exclusively on this topic to avoid complications. Have you received any DNA matches recently?" I asked. "Yes, Dad," she replied with a sigh. "It turned out that Amanda Anderson is my biological half-sister, the daughter of Uncle George and Aunt Ginny," Marissa said. "Oh my God," I said regretfully. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered. "It's not your fault, darling. You never need to apologize to me," I gently assured her. This meant that George Anderson, known to my children as Uncle George and to everyone else as Appeals Court Judge George Anderson, was Marissa's biological father. It followed from this discovery that my wife had an affair with her boss when he worked as a lawyer at Guy Howe and Partners. It must have been about 25 years ago, because Marissa is now 24 years old. Tracy was working as his administrator at the time. He eventually left the firm and pursued a career as a state judge, and later moved to the state capitol, where his career flourished. Tracy decided not to have a romantic relationship with George, but to stay at G. Howe and eventually become an office manager. Despite this, over the years of working together, George and his wife Jenny have struck up a close friendship with Tracy. Their bond was so strong that our children started calling them uncle and aunt, and their children called me and Tracy. It even happened that I was away on a business trip, and Tracy took the children to stay with George and Jenny for a few days at their lake house. The children even mentioned several times that Aunt Ginny took them for walks with her. Neither Uncle George nor Mom accompanied them, and I didn't even think about it. Damn it. I must have been busy because I heard Marissa calling me. "Daddy, Daddy!" I apologized to her, saying that I was lost in my thoughts. "Thanks for the help, baby. Say hi to Drew," I said. Marissa stopped me by saying, "Wait a minute, Dad. What are your plans?" she asked, asking a logical question that I didn't have a good answer to. So I just answered honestly, "I don't know, kid." She warned me, "Well, try not to do anything stupid, Dad. A little stupidity is good, but please don't get yourself arrested." Up to this point, I had never thought about shooting Tracy, but my promise to Marissa was non-negotiable. I swore never to break the promise I made to my children, so pulling the trigger was out of the question. My first priority was to reassure Marissa about our relationship, and then figure out the identity of Tracy's accomplice. As for the third task, the start of the divorce process had to wait until I found a new lawyer. Before taking any further action, it was necessary to find a person unrelated to Tracy's firm. I knew that I would have to meet my wife, Tracy Walters, soon. The atmosphere in the house was cold and tense when we were in each other's presence. Tracy's constant chatter seemed to fill the air like a noisy magpie, which was most likely a consequence of her nervousness. She seemed to be trying to make me happy, perhaps hoping to soften the blow from the upcoming news she had to deliver. I felt a noticeable distance between us, as she seemed unwilling to start a conversation. A week later, I applied for legal help, and the first lawyer I met became noticeably nervous when he learned that my wife worked as an office manager at GY Howe. Moving on to the next lawyer on my list, a young woman in her 20s, I was relieved to see her smile when I mentioned Tracy's position at GY Howe. I knew she was right for me, that she wouldn't be intimidated by the involvement of influential GUI lawyers in my wife's affairs. I shared with her limited information about infidelity, starting with the shocking revelation that my youngest child was not biologically mine, and his father was Judge Anderson. My lawyer's name was Marie Robinette. She was young and ambitious. I watched her closely, wondering if I should look for another lawyer. "Everything should be fine," she assured me before we delved into the details of our financial situation. Since we both have stable jobs, pensions, and benefits, Marie offered to divide the joint property equally, keep our pensions, and sell the house. Such an agreement is beneficial to both of us, although I will have a slight advantage in the form of increased income and a better pension. "Unless you intend to avenge infidelity, a child, or a lack of respect," Marie quickly intervened. After a pause, she suggested that she might take drastic measures to make amends for the wrongs she had caused me. "We will undoubtedly take revenge, but I don't want to cause her financial damage," I replied. "What about the judge? Will he face any charges?" I asked. "If so, it will complicate matters and may not benefit you from the divorce," Marie said. "Then the judge is my concern, and I will solve it in my own way," I replied sharply. "I see," Marie replied. "If you don't fight in court and split everything in half with your wife, it will take about 6 months. But if you decide to fight, then most likely the process will drag on for a year. I haven't set any dates yet, so there's no hurry," Marie said. "Let's make sure we do everything right," I reassured her. Everything was going according to plan. I visited a lawyer. It remains only to sort out the situation itself. I held out for another week, hoping that Tracy would lose her patience and admit everything herself. At this time, our usual Saturday night consisted of a date, watching a movie and making love. But our intimate moments on Saturday nights were always especially significant. It's been 2 weeks since our last date, and we haven't been close since I couldn't bring myself to do it after I found out about the cheating. Surprisingly, Tracy didn't even ask about it. It was clear to me that she understood me, but at the same time she was perfectly able to keep up the facade. But this farce couldn't last forever. I decided to treat her to dinner at an elegant French restaurant. While we were drinking a bottle of wine and enjoying delicious desserts, I noticed a genuine happiness in her that had not been there for several weeks. When I got home, I carefully helped her take off her coat, led her to the kitchen table, pulled out a chair for her, and uttered these terrible words: "We need to talk." Tracy half smiled when I poured myself a drink and offered her something from the liquor cabinet, which she politely declined. Lowering my glass, I met her gaze and she said, "That was 100 years ago, Clark. George and I haven't slept in the same bed for almost 2 decades, Tracy immediately admitted. "Maybe we should consider this a mistake of the past and move on?" Tracy asked nervously. I was glad she didn't directly deny the DNA test results, but trying to downplay them by saying that it was so long ago and it doesn't matter now was in her spirit. "So the last time you were close was about 20 years ago. I need to know when you started making love, how often, and why you stopped. But first I need to make sure that Barry and Katie are mine too," I said. "No, Clark. Barry and Katie belong to you. I started a relationship with George only a year after Katie was born, Tracy quickly replied. Our relationship lasted about 3 years, and then ended when George decided to leave the firm in search of a higher position in the judicial system. After our breakup, George waited a year before taking up his first position on the court to make sure his biography was clean. Our physical relationship was resumed only a few times at the lake house, when Ginny took the children for a day, unaware of our past. Eventually, George revealed the truth to Ginny, which led to a meeting where we both assured her that there would be no more intimacy between us, Tracy said. Why have you never talked to me and tried to discuss everything calmly? Am I just a secondary option for you? I asked. Tracy paused, wiping her hands on her sleeves before confessing. I was afraid to tell you. I was afraid that you would leave me, and I couldn't accept the thought. I loved you then, and I love you now, she said. It looks like you love George more than you love me. I was just a backup plan, I said coldly. No, Clark, I love you with all my heart, Tracy insisted. No, you loved him with all your heart, I said sadly. You loved him so much that you allowed him to realize his career aspirations, leaving me as insurance. Although you may have felt some affection for me, you were well aware of my unwavering devotion to you and our family, which you counted on after he left, I stated firmly. Tracy avoided my gaze, acknowledging that I had revealed a painful truth. What about Marissa? I asked. I thought that since you both have similar facial features, brown hair, brown eyes, and fair skin, no one would suspect the true paternity of the child. I also thought that you had no reason to doubt that the child was yours, but when it turned out that the child looked like me, I didn't expect any problems until you decided to do a DNA test. To be honest, up to this point I was completely unaware of the possible inconsistencies. So, am I to blame for the current situation? Tracy asked. So you don't feel guilty? I asked incredulously. George and I talked about it, but I assured him that you shouldn't worry, because you look so much like each other. He probably didn't know anything either. I haven't heard from him for a very long time, at least a couple of years, since Marissa and Drew's wedding took place, Tracy said. Regardless of anyone's opinions or beliefs, Marissa is definitely mine. I am listed on her birth certificate. I raised her, and my love for her is unshakable. George shouldn't even think about saying otherwise. If he contacts you, let him know. In addition, I will immediately arrange a DNA test for our other 2 children. This is necessary for my peace of mind. Even if you insist that they are mine, I cannot trust you, I said firmly. Tracy looked stunned by my sudden disbelief. But what did she expect? It was obvious that she was also worried about how our children would perceive her infidelity. No one wants to look stupid in front of their own children, I said. So, how long have you been dating this man and where? I asked, trying to keep my composure. We didn't plan this, Clark. It just happened that way, Tracy explained. We spent a lot of time working together, which eventually led to a strong friendship that grew into something more. He had all the qualities that I admired: kindness, attentiveness, wit, humor, and passion. We communicated on a deeper level, but because of our obligations to our spouses, we kept our communications secret, often meeting outside the house. We never crossed the line by meeting at home, as it would be inappropriate, Tracy said. But that didn't stop you from continuing the affair at the lake house, even after it was supposed to end while his wife was with the kids, I said sarcastically. Yes, we couldn't finish the novel, Tracy whispered. But I promise that we haven't had intimacy since then. Jenny knows about everything and has forgiven us both, Tracy said sheepishly. Yes, you've already told me that. I don't think I can do the same, I whispered, my voice filled with excitement. We admit that we did the wrong thing, Clark, but it's been 2 decades now, and you wouldn't have been able to bear the pain while all this was happening. Can't we go back to what happened a few weeks ago? You were my beloved husband, and I was your devoted wife, Tracy pleaded in her voice. Please, Clark, nothing has to change, Tracy begged. But I knew that everything had already changed. I've spent the last 3 weeks wondering what went wrong, how you could fall in love with someone else, and if I could ever trust you again. I gave you my whole heart, and you used it when it was convenient for you. Our marriage wasn't supposed to be just comfortable, I told her. We wanted it to be a union of unwavering devotion and affection. Tracy started crying, and the sight always hurt me. Usually I was in a hurry to comfort her, but in this case, it was different. I retired to the family room, turned on the TV, and she stayed at the kitchen table. That night we slept in the same bed, but when we lay apart, there was a noticeable lack of our usual intimacy. I quickly moved to the other side of the double bed, as far away from it as possible. When she tried to climb up to me, I tried not to let her accidentally touch me. Despite the shock and pain on her face, I remained impassive. On Sunday morning, Tracy cooked a delicious breakfast for us, but during the meal, I brought up the topic of divorce. It's been over 2 decades since the affair, and I didn't even know about it. It's all in the past. We need to move forward, Tracy practically screamed, stunned by the news of the divorce. A mistake remains a mistake, no matter how much time has passed. You deceived me, you lied to me, you cheated on me and broke my trust, I shouted back. Such problems do not go away without a trace. I left half the food on the table and went outside to mow the lawn. This was the last communication with Tracy until Wednesday afternoon, when she mentioned that Jenny Anderson would be joining us next weekend. Although I wasn't thrilled about it, Jenny was a close friend of mine who had gone through the same difficulties as me, so I felt the need to meet her. Jenny arrived at 6 o'clock on Friday evening, having traveled 2 hours from her house. George did not accompany her that evening. Tracy made a stuffed flank steak with mashed potatoes, and I grabbed a few bottles of Merlot to complement the dish. The conversation at dinner was pleasant and relaxed, and after that we went to the family room with glasses of wine. I assumed that this was when the real discussion would begin. Ginny began to talk about the affair in a detached, almost clinical way, but as she went deeper, her emotions surfaced, bringing tears to both her and Tracy's eyes. Jenny said that George confessed to her infidelity, assuring her that it had ended many years ago and would not happen again. She was devastated at first, but eventually realized that since the affair ended before she even knew about it, she wasn't in as much pain as she first thought. Realizing that Tracy wasn't after George's wealth, Jenny understood how the affair began. George's charismatic personality was hard to resist. Jenny apologized for not knowing about Marissa until recently, when her husband's infidelity became public. Jenny had never thought about the chance meetings between Tracy and George that took place after the events of the main novel at the Anderson Lake House. I was wondering if they had shared the details with her. I didn't bother to ask, but I couldn't help but think that George must be an experienced lawyer, given that Jenny seemed to be justifying his cheating rather than being angry at him. Unlike Jenny, I was not so supportive of Tracy and George's relationship, even if it lasted 2 decades. While Jenny seemed pleased and charmed by Tracy's persuasive speeches, I couldn't bring myself to ignore Tracy and George's actions. I can't help but imagine what my life would be like if I left him, and how it would affect me and the girls, Jenny reflected. To think about breaking up with your spouse, you need to carefully consider whether your life will improve or worsen without him, Jenny added sadly. After listening to your point of view, Jenny, I realized that my life is likely to get worse without my wife. This is, of course, a reason for reflection. But my situation differs from yours in that I found out about the betrayal by accident. I was not informed about it. This complicates the decision-making process, I said. Tracy was fully aware that she was committing illegal acts and anticipated my reaction. She decided that it would be better for everyone if I remained in the dark and lived in the dark. This plan would have succeeded if it hadn't been for a revelation that became known 20 years later. It turns out that the woman I loved most in the world was in a romantic relationship with another man before she finally decided to be with me. Tracy, am I right? I asked. My wife was silent, not looking up at me. While Jenny was telling her story, Tracy sat in silence, casting quick glances in my direction to see how I was reacting. I knew her. I was well aware of her secret observations. To provoke Tracy, I kept a casual demeanor and listened to Jenny's story without giving the desired answer. Both Tracy and Jenny were disappointed by my sluggish reaction, as evidenced by the sad exchange of glances between them. I shook my head in disappointment and headed for the kitchen. After pouring myself another glass of wine, I returned to the family room and turned on the big screen, silently making it clear that the discussion was over for today. The women realized this and moved into the living room to chat alone. As soon as the show I was watching ended, I turned off the TV and looked into the living room to say goodnight to them, and then went upstairs to our bedroom. On Saturday, Ginny surprised me in the family room, insisting that we need to talk. Not knowing where Tracy was, I agreed and followed her into the formal living room, where we settled into 2 armchairs in the corner. Clark, I sympathize with your pain more than you think, but refusing to forgive Tracy and end your marriage would be a grave mistake for both of you. Your love for each other should be the most important thing. The past is behind us, and to spend the rest of your life apart because of what happened 2 decades ago would be a tragedy. If I could find the strength to forgive George, then of course you can do the same for Tracy. I understand your hesitation, Clark, Jenny said sympathetically. As I said yesterday, I wasn't informed about the affair, but you were. Tracy decided to hide it from me because she knew it was wrong, and she was afraid that I would never forgive her, I said. Why should I forgive her now after 20 years of cheating? She had an affair for many years and she continued to cheat on me. How can I trust her again? I spoke. Shaking my head, I got up and left the room, passing Tracy in the hallway. She knew what Jenny and I were discussing, and she could tell from my expression that I wasn't going to change my mind. Dinner on Saturday night was filled with awkward silence. The women tried to make small talk, but I was not interested, and I only said a few words during the whole dinner. After expressing my gratitude, I quickly grabbed my jacket and left, telling the women that I was heading to Malone's, my favorite place to have a quiet drink. When I entered Malone's, I noticed that Ronnie, the owner of the bar, was chatting with other customers in the corner. Instead of sitting at the bar as usual, I chose a table alone, feeling completely depressed and looking even worse. The bartender Marn came up to me with my usual Crown Black with ice and noticed that I looked like my dog had just died. I half-jokingly, half-seriously grinned, admitting that it was more like my marriage was collapsing. Marn walked over to Ronnie and bent down to whisper something in her ear. Ronnie walked away from the customers and headed to the opposite end of the room, taking a seat at the table opposite me. "Okay, spit it out, Superman," she said with a grin. Ronnie, a woman about my age, was of Irish descent and had a cheeky personality thanks to her freckles and fiery red hair. She didn't tolerate any nonsense, but on those rare occasions when someone crossed the line, her husband Moose was always ready to step in and sort out the situation. Moose is a former Marine sergeant with impressive height and weight. Although Malone was usually a peaceful town, the bar was sometimes noisy. I've only witnessed it once. One violent man spoke disrespectfully about Ronnie, and when she stood up for herself, he continued to provoke her. The ICC quickly intervened and knocked the brawler to the floor with one blow. The Moose easily subdued him and held him in place until the authorities arrived to restore order. Ronnie affectionately called me Superman because of my name, drawing comparisons to Clark Kent. She joked that despite my kind nature and successful career, she never wanted to see me vent my anger. We laughed a lot at my playful nickname. Over the past 2 decades, I have often visited Malone's accompanied by Tracy, but I have also been alone to eat and drink. Ronnie and Moose met both Tracy and me, and Ronnie had a keen ability to read people, including me. She was like the sister I never had. Tracy and I broke up, I confessed. Up to this point, I kept everything to myself, but finally, when I opened up, I felt liberated. I found out that she cheated on me with her boss for a staggering 4 years, and not once or several times, but constantly throughout that period. More than 20 years ago, I said. Marissa is not my daughter, but my wife's boss, and she thinks that since it was so long ago and I didn't know about it when it happened, then I should just accept and move on. She says she loves me, has always loved me, and doesn't want to divorce me, I said. That woman is just a fool, Ronnie exclaimed. How dare she do this to you? You're not going to just accept it and let her stay, are you? Asked Ronnie. If Muse and I were in that situation, he would have pinned me against the wall and put the guy's head next to mine, Ronnie said. I was relieved to hear that Ronnie had the same point of view as me. I appreciated her rational and unbiased view, and if she hadn't agreed, I would definitely have reconsidered my position. Look, Superman, it all comes down to respect, Ronnie concluded. I cherish Tracy very much, but her deception was not dictated by love or respect. How could she let you believe for so long that someone else's child is your own? Said Ronnie, still outraged. I told Ronnie about the circumstances with Marissa, admitting that Tracy herself did not know that Marissa was not my daughter. But Ronnie noticed that avoiding the paternity test is an easy way to avoid the truth. Was she apologizing for her infidelity or just for the pain she caused you? Asked Ronnie. This woman knew how to avoid responsibility. I don't believe she ever apologized for cheating, and I'm not sure she ever truly acknowledged the pain she caused me. It seems that her apology was more directed at what I found out about her act, I said. Superman, I can't make decisions for you, but I think she's already shown you what you have to do. I'm really sorry, Clark. Moose and I will pay for today's drinks, and you can take the rest of the bottle. We'll make sure you get home safely at the end of the evening, Ronnie said, patting me on the shoulder. Give me the keys, the taxi driver demanded. I obeyed without question. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when he drove me to the house. Tracy was waiting at the door to help me up the stairs to our bedroom. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the bed, still in my clothes. Tracy took off my shoes and socks and left me to sleep. On Wednesday evening, my son called me at the office. He wanted to discuss Tracy's plan to involve the children in convincing me not to go through with the divorce. Although he didn't say it directly, it was clear that Tracy had developed this strategy. Despite the fact that we are usually on the same wavelength, I realized from our conversation that Tracy put a lot of effort into convincing me. Dad, the decision to divorce Mom would be the stupidest decision since you wore a vacation suit in the 70s, said the son. He tried to lighten the situation with a joke. Really, Dad, to end the marriage because of what she did more than 20 years ago and what you found out about recently? Just a few weeks ago, you confessed your love to her and told her that you would spend the rest of your life together. And now you're ready to give up everything and face the possibility of being alone for the rest of your days because of a mistake, the son continued to say. Are you kidding? Barry, let's call a spade a spade. What she did to him in the beginning may have been a mistake, but after a few months it was already a conscious decision, not a mistake, I said. How would you feel if you found out that your wife was cheating on you? You'd probably lose your head, right? But you never caught her. All this was 20 years ago, the son continued. The physical relationship may have ended, but the betrayal, the disrespect, it all went on, I replied icily. Barry, I always thought you were smarter than to step in and choose sides, but now you're embroiled in your parents' drama. Why, Barry? I asked after a moment of silence. I refused to give in. I was the one who was insulted in this situation, and I'm getting more and more disappointed in you, son. I appreciated this woman so much. I put her on a pedestal, idolized her, and she knew it perfectly well. She was never going to tell me the truth. If it hadn't been for the accident, I would have continued to adore her until I died, only for her to use me as a backup when the man she really loved rejected her proposal. Do I feel like a victim of manipulation? Absolutely, I said. Don't you think you're overreacting? The son asked. He was still talking when I abruptly interrupted the conversation. When I entered the house at 6 o'clock in the evening, Tracy was already busy preparing a delicious dinner. Despite her best efforts, She didn't look pleased when I said I wasn't hungry. I poured myself a glass of Jack, turned on the TV, and settled into my favorite chair. Tracy came in and asked me what was bothering me. It was the same old story. My wife cheated on me for 4 years, had a child with another man, and now my own children are against me. Disappointed, I told Tracy to call Katie and tell her not to contact me the next day unless she wanted to suffer the same fate as Barry. Tracy turned away. After 31 years of marriage, she knows better than to provoke me for someone else. Why do you think that the divorce will not be finalized? Not only did you cheat on me for 4 years with another man and have a child with him, but you also replaced me in your heart with him. You can try to convince me that you're not in love with him and that you won't leave me to marry him if he asks. But the truth is that you can love me. But you're not in love with me, I yelled at Tracy. You have feelings for him, not for me. I'm just a reliable backup, because you always knew that my heart belongs to you and I'm ready to do anything just to be with you. You betrayed me, you deceived me, you disrespected me, and now you have the audacity to try to manipulate our children against me. That was the last straw, Tracy. But I refuse to feel anger towards you, especially towards Jenny, and I will not denigrate George's successful career as a good judge, I said angrily. I will file a statement of irreconcilable differences, which will allow us to keep our separate retirement accounts and divide the house and other property equally, I said, calming down a little. Tracy's tears were streaming uncontrollably down her cheeks as she got up from her chair. In a fit of anger, I accused her of never expressing regret for her infidelity. She doesn't seem to regret it, which in a way is at least honest. I spent the whole night hugging a bottle of Jack. The next day, I contacted my lawyer and instructed her to prepare the divorce documents promptly. She informed me that I could review them on Tuesday, and they would be ready for signing on Wednesday. Tracy was supposed to receive the documents on Thursday, so I asked her to bring her server to my house on Friday evening. I was hoping to be present at the presentation of the documents. After that, I contacted Judge George Anderson's office and informed his secretary of the urgency of the case, asking him to call me back as soon as possible. Judge Anderson immediately called me back, clearly understanding the reason for my request. His slightly worried tone during our conversation, which took place about 2 hours later, confirmed that the matter was indeed urgent. George understood the purpose of my call, but chose not to discuss it in his office. I agreed and arranged to meet him at his house next Saturday at 10 in the morning. Not knowing that Tracy would not be served the night before, I was sure that he would know about it by the time I arrived at his luxurious home after a 2-hour trip. During dinner at Malone's restaurant on Saturday night, Tracy revealed that Jenny had informed her about my upcoming meeting with George the following Saturday. Tracy asked if she should join me on this trip. This is not just a casual conversation. George and I need to have a serious conversation, and you shouldn't be involved in this, I said firmly. You should know that he is a respected judge of the Court of Appeal with a solid reputation, and he may even be considered for a position in the Supreme Court. If you try to act macho with him, you may face legal consequences. Besides, you promised me not to do anything that could jeopardize his career, Tracy reminded coldly. Yes, I remember. You're choosing him over me again, but don't worry. I'll keep my word. I will not take any action that could jeopardize his place on the short list of judges of the Supreme Court. God forbid the show must go on, I said. After dinner, I took a few hours to meet with a lawyer and review the divorce papers. I approved them. As I was leaving, she asked me what my intentions were with Judge George. Why does this bother you? I asked, giving her a sly wink. Since I'm currently busy with several criminal cases, I think you could use the services of an experienced lawyer. Engineers like you don't often show emotions, but your restrained and methodical nature scares me, Marie said. After she gave me her business card, I left the office feeling awkward. The next 3 days passed quickly as I immersed myself in a major project at work, which allowed me to take my mind off my personal problems. My boss expressed surprise that I didn't lose focus amid the chaos in my life. I admitted that I was grateful that at least something was going smoothly. But before I left on Friday night, I told him about Tracy's lawsuit and the upcoming conflict situation with George. I warned my boss that I could end up in jail on Monday if the situation took a turn for the worse. He assured me that he would support me and, if necessary, provide money for bail. We shook hands and said goodbye. When I got home, the air was filled with the alluring aroma of Tracy's cooking again. It seemed that lately she has been making extra efforts to showcase her many talents to me. I couldn't deny that she was a really talented cook. Although I knew what was coming, I couldn't help but feel guilty. When we sat down to dinner, we ate in relative silence, which has been repeated over the past few weeks. Nevertheless, I did not fail to express my gratitude to her for the delicious food she had prepared. No matter what, I am not one of those who is ungrateful. I helped her clear the dishes, and just as we were about to relax in the family room watching TV, we were interrupted by the doorbell. It was almost 7 o'clock. I immediately felt that the guest had not come for me, and I stayed where I was. Tracy smiled at me before going to open the door. A severely dressed young man stood on the porch and asked if Tracy Walters was here. After verifying her identity, he handed her a manila envelope, uttered the words, "You have been served," and quickly left. Tracy froze on the porch, but her shoulders hunched as if she was holding back tears. I led her inside, closed the front door, and directed her to the kitchen table. Despite my assurances, she looked visibly shaken, which is what I expected. We sat in silence, which seemed endless, although in fact only 5 minutes had passed. Suddenly, she broke the silence by muttering, "You're a terrible person," and then stormed upstairs into our bedroom. I stayed where I was, knowing that the hardest part was over. That night, on one of the rare occasions in our marriage, I slept alone in a bed separate from Tracy's. I retired to the guest bedroom that we had prepared for the guests, trying to find rest in a strange and unfamiliar bed. Sleep seemed like a distant luxury, especially after breaking up with the woman I once considered my soulmate. Despite the circumstances, we continued to sleep in the same bed, not wanting to take the first step towards separation. But now, as it seemed to me, it was all over. I got up early and tiptoed around the room to pack my things without disturbing Tracy or escalating the tension. I didn't check to see if she was asleep, but quietly took my clothes and slipped out the door. I dressed in my usual clothes, a collared shirt, a pair of decent Levi's jeans, and cowboy boots with metal tips that were custom made for me during our visit to my son in Dallas. I decided to get out a little earlier than necessary. I tried to arrive at the meeting on time, not wanting to be late. Arriving early, I decided to pass the time at a nearby cafe. When I got to George and Ginny's house at 10 o'clock, I rang the bell. Ginny opened the door looking nervous, but sweet as always. When she hugged me, all I could say was, "I'm sorry it ended like this." She didn't say anything, just took my hand and led me into the room where George had displayed his memorabilia and photographs. George was sitting in his usual chair, but got up when we entered. "Hello, Clark," he greeted me. "Hi, George," I replied. Ginny looked visibly scared as she left the room. We were standing 6 feet apart, our eyes locked. There was a time when I saw this man almost as a brother. Our bond was so strong. George, 2 years older than me, was the same height, but over the past 2 decades he had gained an extra 30 pounds, most of which had settled on his round belly. We trusted each other, shared our aspirations, and enjoyed various activities together, including fishing and hunting. We were once close friends, and I have always admired his successful career as a judge. But now, as he stood in front of me, his gaze was cold and calculating, all feelings of friendship dissolved, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal and anger. This man, who not only stole my wife's love but also became the father of her child, single-handedly destroyed everything that was dear to me. At that moment, all I felt was overwhelming rage. "You may have her heart, but you're just a heartless scoundrel. You can keep your impeccable reputation, Because I promised Tracy to keep this between us, and I always keep my word to her. But you won't keep your manhood, I said rudely. Without hesitation, I lunged forward with my left foot, and then delivered a powerful kick with my right foot, aimed directly at his groin. George's reaction was slower than expected, which allowed my shoe to hit the target exactly. I felt a surge of satisfaction as his body tensed and my foot came into contact with his sensitive area. A painful scream filled the room like the wail of a wounded animal. He collapsed to the floor, clutching his groin and uttering piercing screams of pain. At that moment, Ginny burst into the room, and her eyes widened in shock when she saw her husband writhing in agony on the floor. She rushed to him, but his screams only intensified, and she felt helpless. At that moment, her frightened gaze met mine, who didn't know what to do next. I quickly took my mobile phone out of my pocket and dialed the emergency number, informing the operator about the incident at Judge George Anderson's house and asking to call an ambulance. When I was about to leave, Jenny suddenly grabbed my right arm. Despite the initial instinct for a forceful reaction, I was struck by the calm expression on her face, which replaced any signs of hysteria or anger. She hugged me tightly and said softly, "Thank you. We understood what needs to be done." Hugging her back, I left the house, got into the car and drove home, confident that the authorities would not pursue me. Ginny has understood the situation and will discuss it with her husband when he is in a better mood. The trip home brought a sense of relief, although it felt like a punch in the stomach. For several months, I didn't understand anything. I was drowning in mental anguish every day. But when I finally revealed Tracy's betrayal, a weight was lifted from my shoulders. Surprisingly, as soon as I found out the truth, her power over my heart weakened, and I was finally able to make reasonable decisions on my own. It may not have been the best choice for everyone, but sometimes you need to put your own well-being first. After all, that's exactly what everyone else has been doing for the past 2 decades. Why shouldn't I do the same? Yes, I understood that some part of me would always continue to love Tracy, but I refused to dwell on it. It wasn't my fault or my decision. It was time to let go of the situation and move forward. When I got home, I went down to the basement, packed a few suitcases, and headed to our bedroom. Tracy watched me as I walked past her into the family room and followed me into the bedroom. "Is that all?" she asked. "That's it," I confirmed. "We have lived for 31 years and all in vain. It pains me to see how narcissistic you are, unable to recognize the deception that robbed me of 24 years of love. It hurt, but I don't hate you at all. Even George, who may mistakenly think otherwise, is not the object of my anger," I said. "In the future, I plan to establish a relationship with Barry and Katie. It is important for you to reconcile with Marissa as soon as possible, because she is going through difficulties. Tracy, please sign the papers so we can finish this case, or I will destroy you and this jerk. In the next few days, I will take out the remaining things. I think we'd better not talk anymore. If you have something to say, you can contact my lawyer using the business card on the kitchen table," I said. Tracy stood there, visibly upset, but silent. I packed up my things, loaded them into the car, and left the house. 31 years have passed like a flash. I had hoped that George had lost his manhood, but it turned out that this was not the case. Thanks to extensive surgery and months of torment, he managed to maintain his masculinity. This amazing news reached me through Marissa, whom Ginny turned to in search of me. Ginny didn't know my phone number, and none of the family members wanted to share it with me. In fact, it's been 8 months now, and none of the family members have contacted me, but I've come to terms with it. The official explanation was that Judge George had an accident in his office. He fell on his desk and then on the floor. Out of delicacy, the press called it a domestic accident, without mentioning that the injury occurred in the groin area. When Tracy refused to sign the divorce papers, I informed Marie that we were starting to act. A lawsuit has begun against George, and he has received a large number of negative responses in the media. This will prevent him from becoming a candidate for the Supreme Court. Tracy became known as Judge Anderson's mistress. A couple of traders lost their positions and were disgraced throughout the country. I got a divorce and also got a huge compensation from George. My children were in despair watching me punish cheaters. The house will be put up for auction in the near future. Tracy hasn't tried to contact me since everyone found out about her and George's identity. Barry and Katie have not been in touch yet. It looks like I won't be included in the family Christmas dinner plans. My boss is handing over the company to me starting next year, as he is retiring. According to the contract, I have to run the company for 7 years, after which I can safely retire with a generous severance package. After that, he will look for a buyer for the company, and I will also receive 10% of this deal. Having been married for what seemed like an eternity, I finally decided to plunge into the world of dating again. It took me a while to remember how to navigate the dating scene, but the news of my divorce spread like wildfire. Before I knew it, our divorced friends were reaching out to me, curious about my newfound interest. Even a few of Tracy's friends who had gone through a divorce themselves called to express their shock that she could let me go. I must admit that such attention has pleasantly boosted my ego. Exciting opportunities are opening up for me both in my professional and personal life. In my free time, I am actively looking for new hobbies that I could pursue outside of personal commitments. One of the hobbies that I recently decided to give up is genealogy, which I used to be interested in. And that's the end of the story. Thank you for your valuable time. Give me your generous likes. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.